As we move slowly, and I mean very slowly, through the story of Berserk, it seems as though we're heading towards a grand battle that is largely going to be between the Kushan Empire and the new Band of the Hawk. I say this with confidence as the recent few chapters have given us the perspective of the Kushan Empire as kind of our protagonistic group, and many of its members have mentioned their future plans for attacking the Band of the Hawk and bringing Griffith down. And this is what I believe to be one of the integral battles of the remainder of Berserk. This is what's going to decide the fate of our main characters, and most certainly the fate of the new Band of the Hawk and the Kushan Empire in general. So it only makes sense that they end up having a conflict, and having that conflict pretty soon, based on the recent few chapters. So I'll be referring to this battle as the final battle in this video, though there is a good likelihood that this isn't actually going to be the last big fight that we have. There's of course so many plot holes left in Berserk. There's the character of Guts and Griffith and how their conflict is going to end, and then you have the issue with Griffith and the Moonlight Child that pretty much has more to do with the resolution of Griffith's character than anything else mentioned so far. And there's also the chance that this battle won't be something like the Golden Age battles, because after all, there are apostles now and there's a lot of magic involved, whereas in Golden Age, Berserk was essentially just a medieval story. However, I do think this is going to be one of the largest battles simply in terms of the scale, because the Kushan are going to be invading with their biggest army yet, and Griffith obviously still has his Band of the Hawk, which is as massive as ever. So if anything, this video is just to assess the strength levels of both sides, because we don't know exactly what this final battle is going to look like. At the end of the day, it's just speculation. But like I said, in my opinion, characters like Griffith, Guts, and Casca will have their own conflicts, and those conflicts will be entirely separate from this battle. But I still do think for the world building and the large scale of the story, this battle will be very important. So if you recall, the Kushan Empire had already engaged with the Band of the Hawk under Ganishka, but they ended up losing because Griffith's army was just too strong. And also because of Guts teaming up with Zodd and dealing the final blow while riding on Zodd, making one of the most iconic panels in the entire series. At the time, the Kushan Empire weren't on our protagonist group. In fact, they were more of an antagonistic force, as Guts had to fight Daiba, and of course Guts was the one who took down Ganishka. However, now the recent chapters of Berserk have made it so that the Kushan seemingly are entirely on our side. This is of course brought about by Rickert being involved with the Kushan initially, and now bringing Guts into the picture, as MIA as Guts is at the moment. So because of how much time is being invested into the Kushan Empire, and because of how much information we are being given on their strategies and their intentions, it's only natural to assume that they are going to play a huge role in the story moving forward and in this final battle, especially on the side of our protagonist, because at the moment our protagonist group wants to bring down Griffith. At least Guts wants to bring down Griffith, and it seems like the entirety of the other groups other than the Band of the Hawk are slowly starting to shift in that direction, the Kushan Empire included. And we're following the Kushan Empire, of course, through the eyes of the former Bakiraka leader, Silat. Now you have to get a little bit deeper into the Kushan Empire if we're going to dissect how exactly they're going to assemble an army that is strong enough to take down Griffith, which is going to be quite the task, because Ganishka himself, who was too strong for Zodd to take down, couldn't even lay a scratch on Griffith. Before we talk about the Kushan, consider subscribing so we can hit 20k. It does mean a lot to me. So there's a few variables we have to take into account when we consider the final battle of Berserk. The main one is the Kushan, of course, did the largest army, but of course Griffith's main army as well. Those are the two conflicting forces. But then we have another force, being the Godhand, who essentially controls everything, and of course the idea of evil is the god whose hand is the Godhand, if that makes sense. We saw that in the last chapter. And then we have the wildcards, which can play incredibly crucial roles, making up entire armies on their own. Skull Knight, for example, is an entire army on his own. He's one of the wildcards. There's also the Moonlight Child and his relationship to Casca. Guts himself is a wildcard, depending on what he does with the behelit and what he does in his berserker armor. Rakshas, a character we're seeing currently in the manga right now as of the recent chapter. And believe it or not, I believe Zodd to be a very big wildcard as well. And I'll get more into Zodd and his real intentions later in the video. So the Kushan have a simple goal. Their goal is as simple as any other kingdom. It's to expand their kingdom. This allows them to flexibly transition from antagonists to supporting characters, as we've seen them in the recent chapters. Now, the one stopping their expansion as an empire is of course Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. And that's not the only reason they want to bring down Griffith. It's because Griffith is trying to bring down the Kushan Empire as well, because Griffith too wants to expand his kingdom. Exactly like Guts said, Griffith will not stop. Despite the fact that he has his own kingdom, which was the goal that we were shown from the beginning of the story, Griffith's character continues to follow exactly the words Guts laid out. He is never going to rest. He is always going to continue soaring higher because he is the White Hawk. So the Kushan in the recent chapters are conducting a summit in preparation for the upcoming war with Griffith. This summit is known as the Kurultai. So this Kurultai is essentially a meeting between the leaders of various Kushan armies, Silat included, a bunch of other people included, but most of these other guys are leaders of big armies within the Kushan Empire, whereas Silat himself is just the leader of the Bakiraka, which is kind of just like a mercenary group within the Kushan Empire, kind of like how Guts was before he joined the Band of the Hawk, being a lone mercenary. The other members accuse Silat of not belonging into the main army, but the Kushan Emperor has different ideas. Remember, he's the one who replaced Ganishka after he was killed by Griffith. The main strategy is very simple. It's to gather all military might and target it at Griffith, which is something that Ganishka failed to do, as he was thinking in his own ambition and drew all the power to himself. Just simply looking at it, it's going to be nearly impossible for just the Kushan army alone to bring down the Band of the Hawk, which is mainly due to the elite apostles, who even Berserker armor Guts couldn't take down without a crazy fight. I'm talking about characters like Grunbeld, Locust, and obviously Zodd, but again, Zodd's a wild card that I'll have to get into later. And speaking of Zodd, he's one of the strongest, if not the strongest apostle on Griffith's army. He's Griffith's right-hand man, essentially. And one of the initial encounters they had with the Kushan Empire, which was in the War Cry of the Wind chapter 183, Zodd absolutely demolishes the Kushan Empire in just his human form. And that's only Zodd, not even taking into account the apostles or any of the other high-ranking apostles like Locust or Grunbeld. It was simply Zodd, not even in his fully released form, absolutely demolishing the entire Kushan army, and Griffith taking down the leader with complete ease. So it's pretty simple to say that no matter how big the Kushan Empire army is, they're not even going to stand a single chance against the Band of the Hawk. Silat requests to lead the Kushan army in the upcoming war, which might hint at a plan that he asked for taking down Griffith, but let's be honest, this motherfucker isn't gonna do shit. This really surprised me because Silat was there when Griffith initially took down the Kushan, so he's seen that Griffith has these supernatural abilities to dodge all the arrows coming at him. He knows that Griffith has apostles like Zodd on his side, so what kind of plan could he possibly have to take down Griffith, and why is he so confident in being appointed as the leader when he knows that his loss will bring about the downfall of the Kushan Empire? And it's true that the Kushan Empire are strong individuals. They've taken loss after loss and they've still managed to rebuild themselves into a fairly respectable army. But when it comes to fighting Griffith, who is not human, and his entire army is not human, they still don't stand a chance. Especially when you consider the fact that Silat isn't even really considering Guts as an ally. I mean, he might consider him as an ally, but I don't think he's part of his plan should he lead the army in this upcoming battle. So of course the Kushan army stands no chance. That is, of course, if we don't consider the wild cards. The first one I'm going to be considering is Rakshas, because he appears in the recent chapter, and while he is a member of the Band of the Hawk, there is some suspicious activity as to whose side he's really on. Supposedly Rakshas was killed by Rickard about 35 chapters ago. However, he makes his return here, but something interesting comes up in his conversation with Rickard in chapter 340, where he mentions his desire to take down Griffith. Rakshas is one of these characters. He's one of these wild cards that has the potential to join our side, but the only problem with that is that right here he's engaging with Silat, who appears to be possibly the leader of this army coming up. So this altercation needs to be solved in a way that brings Rakshas to our side. The only way I see that happening is for his desire to kill Griffith to be stronger than his desire to fight Silat and the Kushan Empire as of right now. There's also a possibility that he just dies here, which is why I won't spend much longer talking about his potential, but he does possess unique magic abilities that the Kushan army kind of lack, except of course for Daiba, who is going to be a very strong member of the Kushan Empire, because of course he gave Berserker armor Guts, under control Berserker armor Guts, with Shirka on his back, a run for his money. So now I want to talk a little bit about Zodd, because there's a theory going around the Berserk community that Zodd is going to betray Griffith, and it's kind of been floating around for a while now, so I feel like I have to address it in this video. There's a lot of people that point to this panel specifically, which is actually not a panel from very long ago. It's only in like the last 10 chapters, where it shows Zodd looking away from Griffith while the other members of the army, the high-ranking apostles of the army, such as Grunbeld, we can see, and Locust in the panel down below, bowing down to Griffith and obeying his command to go east, whereas Zodd is just looking the other direction, potentially foreshadowing that he's literally looking in a different direction and going off on his own. But the big question here is, what does Zodd want? The answer to it, we suspect, is to fight the strongest. To have a battle with somebody that's going to make him feel alive again. Because after 300 years of just fighting boring competition who can hardly even lay a scratch on him, he wants to fight the strongest. And he's had a taste of strong contenders. I mean, Guts was the most obvious example way back in Golden Age. And then during the reunion on the Hill of Swords, Guts fights him again, this time putting up more of a battle and making Zodd go into his monster form. And what's really interesting, which is something I completely forgot about, is this scene right here in chapter 128, which shows symbolism of Zodd wanting to fight Griffith and engaging with Griffith, but in kind of a dreamlike setting. In this moment, right before Zodd confronts Griffith in that dream, it also shows his respect, I guess, for Skull Knight being his strongest opponent, because he says that humans or apostles cannot satisfy me. There really are none but you, wretch. And he's referring to Skull Knight here. But as he's thinking about this, a white hawk appears, which appears to be obviously Griffith. And this is essentially where Griffith recruits Zodd into his band of the Hawk, but Zodd, obviously being Zodd, goes to attack him, and this is how Zodd loses his horn. It's a really interesting contrast between Zodd's desire to fight the strongest and Zodd's acceptance of the strongest and obeying of Griffith's command and falling under his wing. Something I hear is that because Griffith can't be touched, because he's such a supernatural being, this might explain why Zodd doesn't seek to fight him right now. But if we're considering who the strongest being in the world is, there's no doubt that it's Griffith. Another problem to consider with Zodd fighting Griffith is that he's going against causality. Now Zodd tends to stick with causality and obey the Godhand's will. This is why he saves Griffith from Wild, and this is why he doesn't interfere with a lot of things going on in the world. However, there are certain slight moments where it's shown that he does interfere with certain events. This can be shown when he throws his sword towards Guts to save him, obviously wanting to save Guts because he's potentially a worthy opponent. So there are certain instances where Zodd disobeys the Godhand, but to go to such a large scale to disobey the Godhand to fight Griffith seems extremely selfish and unlike Zodd. However, this really does depend on who Zodd serves more, Griffith or the Godhand, because it is a well-established theory that the Griffith and the Godhand do not share the same ideals and that they are eventually going to part ways in some way. I'm actually thinking of a theory video for this coming up, not necessarily that Griffith betrays the Godhand, but how they separate and how they become antagonistic forces towards each other, of course. So if Zodd does serve the Godhand and Griffith and the Godhand eventually part ways, be it through betrayal or whatever, then Zodd has essentially the green light to fight Griffith, but I believe the reason he will be inclined to fight Griffith will have to do with Guts and the possibility of Griffith actually being taken down by a human. The reason I'm considering this is because that little hair that Guts was able to cut off Griffith when he fought him in chapter 368. If Zodd were to see something like that, he might be inclined to fight Griffith because it seems as though he's losing his supernatural ability slowly but surely. It's also really interesting to consider Skull Knight's rivalry with Zodd and what that will look like should Zodd betray Griffith, but at the end of the day, Skull Knight will still oppose Zodd if he betrays Griffith because Skull Knight's main objective is to defy the Godhand and bring them down. So if Zodd does still serve the Godhand, then Skull Knight will forever be his rival. Speaking of the Skull Knight, who is another one of the wild cards I was talking about, his desire to bring down the Godhand will bring another dimension into this final battle should the Godhand even be involved. There's a large chance that they don't get involved and that this is saved for a later part of the story after this final battle, but the main way the Godhand are going to be summoned at this point in the story, really the only way I see it possibly happening, is of course with Guts' behelit. This is also why I alluded to Guts as a wild card, because we don't know what's going to happen after he summons the Godhand, and we don't know what state he's going to be in when he summons the Godhand. If he's in the state of the Berserker armor, which has had a lot of foreshadowing for taking over Guts, then this eclipse that comes about will have a very interesting outcome. Of course, if Guts is in his human form and in control of his mental capabilities, then he's not going to sacrifice anyone or anything to the Godhand. He's not going to accept the offer. However, if he's in his Berserker armor form and if it's taking over him completely, if Shirke can't control him, that is a completely different story. Hence why Guts is a wild card. This also makes Skull Knight Guts' enemy if Guts does something with the behelit and accepts the Godhand's offer under the influence of the Berserker armor, of course. Then there's also the possibility of the Berserker armor consuming Guts, just like it did with the Skull Knight, and how that parallel is going to play out. But I just do find it difficult for the Skull Knight to become Guts' enemy just simply due to the parallels that the two characters have, but I shouldn't go too far into that because this is completely a different video for a different time. As is the Moonlight Child and Casca, who play a very, very big role in the downfall of Griffith, arguably even bigger than this entire battle and everything I've talked about thus far. But like I said, that's for a different video. There's also a fundamental problem with the Kushan winning, and that's that the entire Berserk world as we know it now will be ruled by the Kushan. So the ending of Berserk is just the Kushan Empire, who's essentially an empire based in India, which actually existed. So part of Berserk is based on a true story, and one of their emperors were actually named Kanishka. So even more so part of a true story. But yeah, I just don't see the Kushan ruling an entire continent. Like, that's just, I don't see that as an ending possibility. But I also don't see the Band of the Hawk lasting to the end of the story. They may take over the Kushan Empire and absolutely eviscerate them and take over the entire continent, but then that just shifts the weight of the story onto the Moonlight Child and Casca for bringing about Griffith's downfall. But of course, there's so many variables that I haven't even considered in this video. There's so many ideas that you watching this video have that I haven't even considered, so I'd love to hear what you think, and I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. I might even make a video going over the theories that you comment under this video, because you all have very brilliant ideas. I've seen it before. So if you like this theory, drop it a like, and I'll get to work on some other very interesting ones that I have kept in the back of my mind. Thank you for watching. Happy New Year. Watch this video on the screen right now, and I'll see you in the next one.